Hi, folks. I've been asked this week whether I think that the New Deal of the 1930s was a success or a failure. And like with many of these kinds of questions, I think it was a little bit of both. But on balance, many Americans who were alive during that period still consider the New Deal to have been a godsend to the country that was in desperate shape in the pit of the Great Depression. Not everything that FDR did was approved of by Americans, and certainly many of his programs were struck down by the Supreme Court. But for thousands and thousands of farm families, programs like the Agricultural Adjustment Act allowed them to save the family farm, and millions of people were put to work on public works programs like the WPA and the PWA, and we're still living with many of the results of those projects in the form of bridges and tunnels and highways and conservation projects, and many of those are considered national treasures today. Also, millions of young men went off to work in civilian conservation corps camps and received employment when, generally speaking, there wasn't really many jobs for them at the time. So you would get paid $1 a day, and they would send like 80 cents of that back to your family. So if you're out, I guess, in the conservation camp working, there's really not many ways to spend money anyway. But the families back home really benefited from those remittances, and oftentimes, maybe a family of 5 or 6 was relying upon that money that that young man was earning. Certainly there were successes of the New Deal, things like FDIC, Social Security, many other things that we still have today. But then you have the other side. You have the failures of the New Deal. Programs like the NRA, the National Recovery Act, were struck down by the courts. In 1937, President Roosevelt attempted to add additional justices to the Supreme Court in what was called the court packing scheme. And overwhelmingly, the American people disagreed. They saw that as an infringement of the executive branch on the powers of the judicial branch, that this was an undermining of the Constitution. And FDR utterly failed in his efforts to change the High Court. Fundamentally, you could argue that the New Deal failed to end the Great Depression itself. The Depression ran an entire decade, and only the massive spending of the country during World War II brought the country out of the crisis, and also the spending of our European allies who bought a lot of war materials from America. So the New Deal doesn't end the Great Depression, but it makes it bearable for many people. So I hope you have a great weekend, and I will talk to you folks later.